I begin with Saraswati, the Hindu goddess of learning, and the carving of the Samudra Manthana, the churning of the ocean of milk, which, as we all know, is a story from many of our epics and our Puranas. Both these are very striking in their visual impact, and you'd be interested to know where they're from. The provenance is quite interesting. This is actually outside the Indonesian embassy in Washington, D.C. This is outside the Indonesian embassy, and this is outside the Cambodian embassy. It takes a special kind of courage to stalk embassies and take pictures these days. But the ambassadors were kind enough to let me take the pictures. So we have this picture of the churning of the ocean of milk, which, interestingly enough, is outside Cambodia. And many of us know the story, at least some of us do. And it's a story of the Asuras and the Devas coming together to churn the ocean of milk, the Kshetrabdi, for the nectar of immortality, for Amrita, and what happens then. Compared to all the other stories like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata and the many stories of Krishna, this is relatively minor in India. And yet, what we find in Cambodia is a very different situation. And I'll quickly run through these slides just for visual impact, just to tell you that over and over again, after the 9th century, we find this particular story in panels after panels, and after that, after the 12th century, in the round on bridges all over Angkor. 70 kilometers from Siem Reap in Bang Melia, which meant it was the lotus pond, Pushkarini almost, where you see the Halo Trust, that's the demining trust established by Princess Diana. And if you see it, it says that when it started, it gave a date, but it didn't give a date finished. So it's always hazardous to venture into these areas. But when I went there in 2005, it was with a very specific purpose. You had to go through the rubble. And it's unfortunate, a huge Vishnu temple built and which stood for a millennium had been demolished by Pol Pot's regime. And then you go through this rubble, and finally you go through this. It's kind of like Indiana Jones wannabe territory. And finally, you see here in the rubble the churning of the ocean of milk. And the reason I went then was because the people in FEO told me, if you don't go now, it may not be there next year. And you have to literally wipe the moss off to take the pictures. But the point I'm trying to make is that this is a very popular story. Out here in Prepitu, they told me there was one, and we couldn't find it. And for 4 years, I searched for it. No one knew it, even the local authorities. And finally, a little boy told me where he could find it. And way on top, near the top branch, perched on it, is the churning of the ocean of milk. So yes, we had to climb it and do these things. It's popular you can see it in popular art. All the tourists usually buy one of these rubbings. It's even seen as an election logo. So every party wants to say they're the Devas. You find it outside hotels. And in 2003, when a memorial park was built to honor all those who died during the Vietnam War and during the genocide by Pol Pot, the memorial park was encircled with the Devas and Asuras pulling the serpent Vasuki for Amrita. Out of the thousands of stories that they could have picked from the Hindu and the Buddhist texts, why is it that this story was important for them? That's the question. When important state events take place, like when Duryodhana, the statue of Duryodhana, was being returned to Cambodia, it takes place in front of panels of the churning of the ocean of milk. The largest bas-relief in the world, 49 meters wide, in 3 registers, the churning of the ocean of milk, is in Angkor Wat, built around 1132 by the king Suryavarman. Angkor Wat adorns the national flag of Cambodia. It's the only flag with a Hindu temple on it, a Vaishnava temple, I should say, now a Buddhist temple. And wherever a disputed territory is marked, it's with this flag. This is Previhir. It's on beer cans, police labels, and tourist logos. It's the largest temple in the world according to some authorities, though there's some dispute on the size between that and the Swaminarayan temple. The longest Sanskrit inscription in the world, which shows the genealogy of the Cambodian kings, the Sotkhopthom inscription, which is inside the security area of the National Library in Bangkok. It's the longest inscription, Sanskrit inscription, was from the Khmer Empire. Written in the local, it's Sanskrit written in the local Khmer script. Names, as we all know, from Ayodhya or Sisaket, which is Sri Saket, are all from Sanskrit names. So the question is, how did this all come to be? And we start there. Yesterday, and many of the students here would recognize it, we had a walkthrough to the major sites and the major temples that we'll be covering in the 3 days here. But today, I'll be talking after the introduction and a few caveats about the time periods, pre-Angkorian, Angkorian, and Angkorian, and get started with how did it all begin. The sources are largely inscriptions and material culture. And the caveats, cultural relationships are always reciprocal. Although my talk might give you the impression that I'm talking about a one-way influence, that's not the case. These are never unilateral. We always have influences on both sides. Second, even though I'll be pointing to particular areas, particularly Kanchipuram area, in my talk, to show connections with Cambodia, we shouldn't imagine that any of these are discrete or isolated. As we all know, towns and areas in India or Cambodia were constantly in touch with other parts of the world. Globalization didn't happen yesterday. And they were in touch, the north and the south and different parts of India were in touch. The Pallavas and the Chalukyas were at war with each other, bringing each other's sculptors and architects to each other. So we have influences going from different parts of India. We see it very strongly. And so the town of Kanchi, which I'll be coming to quite a bit in the end, is also very much part of this flux. However, that's not the impression we get in these kinds of maps, which you find in Thailand, in Pimai, in the Pimai Museum, where it shows a kind of unilateral distribution of culture. I'll be talking about other places, largely Kanchipuram, a little bit about Kalinga, and I'll go out on a limb and put Kashmir on the map, even though that's speculation at this point, very largely. There's no smoking gun there. My talk, as Dr. Jha said, would be about an hour and 15 minutes, but I'll stop promptly at that point. Although I'm talking about the similarities, please remember there are many, many differences. In other words, this is where the agency part of the title comes in. That is, Cambodia, like many other cultures, had the world at its disposal. And it picked and chose what it wanted from different parts of the world culture. Unlike the Cham civilization, its neighboring civilization, which is part of Vietnam, which was heavily Sinicized, that is, a lot of Chinese influence, Cambodia had more Indian. And it picked and chose what it wanted among it. And the final caveat, the places I'm talking to in leading to Angkor, the history of how did it all come to be before I get into Angkor Wat itself, covers a large area. This is present-day Cambodia. But this is a larger area we'll be talking about. But while I have this map up, I'd like you to remember to see one thing. This is the river Mekong, and it meets the Siem Reap and the Tonle Sap River here in Phnom Penh. For 6 months of the year or longer, when the snow has melted and the monsoon rain comes, the river flows upwards. And I'd like you to keep that in mind. I'll come back to that later in the talk today. And during that time, Tonle Sap, the lake on whose bank sits Angkor, right here, becomes several times its size. And I'll come back to that point later. Angkor is at this junction, it's on the banks of the Tonle Sap River. These are the lotus ponds in front of it, and during the monsoon time, while it's steamy and hot, you also get the most spectacular sunrises there. Probably modeled after a kind of impression of Vaikunta, because of the moat around it. We feel that this, when it was built, was seen to be literally heaven on earth. I'll start off with a short look at the legendary and historical context of the empire. The Cambodia Empire traces its origin mythologically to a man who is of the Surya Vamsha, that is the solar dynasty from India, and a Naga princess. The earliest texts, however, earliest references are in Chinese texts about the Funan and the Genla empires. The legendary versions are seen in inscriptions in a temple addressed to Shiva called Bakset Chambrong, which is very close to Angkor, right across from Angkor. And according to this particular inscription, the origins of the Cambodia Empire, the Khmer Empire, comes from either, and there are 2 or 3 versions of the story, either a rishi called Kambu or Kaundinya as a male, or even a descendant of Ashwathaman from the Mahabharata, and the female is always a Naga princess. So the Surya Vamsha mingles with the Naga princess, and the Naga, which you find depicted outside starting with around the early 9th century, becomes a very elegant one. Look at the short, thick neck here, becomes a very elegant one by the time you come to the balustrades of Angkor Wat. It's a very popular symbol and a logo of the tourist agencies also. Historically, however, we go back to material evidence starting with about the 5th century with an inscription by Queen Kulaprabhavati, who endows land for the god who sleeps on the serpent bed, Seshasai. Although we call it Vaishnava, the temples themselves are not generally called Vaishnava or Shaiva. The sectarian names are usually given for the ashramas. So by the time we come to the 9th century, we have donations, so the kings made the endowments to Vaishnava, Shaiva, and Bauddha. And Bauddha always meant Mahayana. And King Yashovarman did it. Queen Kulaprabhavati gave this to, let's call it for simplicity, a Vaishnava place. And her son Gunavarman also gave it, and he identifies himself as coming from the Kaundinya Vamsha, to a Vaishnava ashrama, and he calls it the Chakratirtha and the Vishnupada. Some of the earliest sculptures and temples are actually seen near Pakse in Wat Phu area of Laos. This area is called the Linga Parvata, and the king who built the temples here styled himself Mahendra Varman, also known as Chitrasena, which is very interesting because those are the exact names given to kings. A particular king gave himself during the Pallava times. That is, he called himself Mahendra Varman, also known as Chitrasena. And that same names come up in the temple here. And why did I go to Laos past the Mekong? Because this has one of the churning of the ocean of milk panels in situ. And the local inscriptions in the Ubon Ratchathani Museum in Thailand calls it, quote unquote, Pallava alphabet. What they mean is the script. And it makes it clear that Prince Chitrasena has conquered the land of Kambu and so on. But the word Kambu comes much later. In 802, King Jayavarman II, his origin is unknown, though some people have said it's Java, and the date could be off by a few dates. This begins the Angkorian era. And Jayavarman is a name like Henry in England. just like you have Henry the 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, forever. You have Jayavarman going up to at least 7 for the important kings. He is said to have established the Kamboja Empire, the Angkorian Empire, and two out of his 5 capitals are Hariharalaya and Phnom Kulen. This is the Phnom Kulen area. A mount. Phnom means a mount or a short hill. And in there, you begin to see reclining Vishnus in the waterbed, inside the water. And all through the water in Phnom Kulen, which is one of the capitals and still one of the holiest places for the Cambodians, you find carvings of the reclining Vishnu. On the bed, you literally have to take the moss off, the leaves off, and look at them. And it looks like they're kind of experimenting with it, alongside the lingas. This area, by the way, is the area in which all the LiDAR technology has been taking place. You may have seen some of these articles in The Guardian, Smithsonian, and so on, which they used the LiDAR technology they've used a lot of it in Central America. But now they're using it in the last 10 years or so. An Australian scholar called Damien Evans has been using it in Angkor, and it reveals from the laser technology vast cities which have now been buried, larger than the size of Phnom Kulen today. And it shows you which areas were highly populated, what was grown and where. I mean, it's just amazing. It's like science fiction when you read it. So Damien Evans shows how these multiple cities between 900 and 1400 years old are beneath the tropical forest floor. And that's the area near Mahendra Parvata called Phnom Kulen, and is very close to Angkor. It's just a day's trip. He's a very young scholar. This was taken at a panel a couple of years back when we were talking. He's a second from the left. And he has been really pioneering this use in that area. Other than Phnom Kulen, the second capital city was Hariharalaya, called Rulos today. And this is one of the capital cities, one of the temples there. The other one is Pre Ko. Ko, Pre means sacred, Ko is bull, so it refers to Nandi. It refers to 3 temples built for ancestors and their wives behind them, the queens. The one way of legitimizing your kingship was to build temples to your ancestors to show how closely connected you were with them. And matrilineal descent was quite fine. And the names itself is kind of like saying Rajarajeshwaram or Rajasimeshwaram, so like that. But the local interpretation is that these are the spirits of the ancestors, not the Shiva, who is the god of those kings. And the other temple, this is Preko, and the other one is, which is also addressed to Shiva, is the Bekong temple. Notice how distinctive the architecture is. Shiva temple, but not like Shiva temples in India. They share a same architectural vocabulary with the other parts of Southeast Asia. It resembles Borobudur or Mayan temples, actually, more than they do Indian temples. But there was very precise planning in doing this. Temples to Shiva were temple mountains, resembling Kailasa. But frequently, they came in 5 levels. 5 because, as we know from many of the texts, including the Tamil ones, the Tiruvasakam, for instance, of Manikavashakar, shows how the number 5 is so close to Shiva. Even the mantra, Panchakshara, is Namah Shivaya. And so there are 5 floors for Shiva temples. And on top, the shrine with the linga. In Hariharalaya, you had beautiful carvings. The one on the right is identified, we're not really clear, but an inscription found nearby the inscription says there's a temple for Shiva with his consorts Uma and Ganga. But we're not sure exactly if this was Shiva with Uma and Ganga, or it could have been, some people think it could be Vishnu with Shri and Bhudevi also. And it's now in the Angkor Conservancy because the pillaging has been rampant. And then the other temple mountain with 5 floors is closer to it's called Bakeng, and close to Angkor. In the late 9th century, Yashovarman the king transfer the capital from Rulos about 12 miles north into the Angkor area. And Bakeng was built here. Again, 5 floors, 108 towers. And according to one text I've read, by the time I went in 2000 and started to go in 2002, it was very much in ruins. It doesn't look like this at all now. According to one of the early texts, apparently from any place you could only see 33 of the towers from any angle. And the 33 because of the 33 gods mentioned in the Upanishads, and so 33 there was the 11, the Adityas, the Rudras, and so on. And this is the plan that he had drawn up of Bakeng, remarkably similar to some of the mandalas which you find in the consecration of deities. I like this picture because it says parking and it had all the elephants parked there. Phnom Bakeng was a Shiva temple, but it also has other Vishnu temples. A quick roll call of all the gods and goddesses found in pre-Angkorian Cambodia before we go to Angkor itself. We find Ganesha, we find Harihara. Harihara was only popular during the pre-Angkorian times, lost out during the Angkorian times. And there are reasons for that, which you won't get into. Ganesha, Skanda, again not found after this time. And Shiva is seen both in an anthropomorphic form as well as linga form. Kokai is a very tall, it's an alternative capital for a short while under Jayavarman IV, and an amazing place. The lingas are always found next to Vishnus. So you don't have exclusive Vishnu temples or exclusive Shiva temple as was seen in contemporary times in South India. You find them coming together. In fact, even in the earlier temple I showed you of Bekong, there's an inscription which says the palace women installed icon of Mahishasuramardini. And then we also have evidence of a Vishnu there. And here, Kabal's Plain, which is about a 1-hour trek up the mountains from Bante Shre, you find Vishnu, but look how he's in a reverse reclining position. And I'll come to that point too soon. And the Siem Reap River flows over his toes, and this river has been likened to the Ganga. So it flows over the toes of Vishnu and over the head of the Shivalinga, and then comes down to the floor. Now, depending on the time of the year you go, it could be completely dry. So it's not always seen. It's also called the river of 1,000 lingas. But Shiva is also called the dancing, it's seen in the dancing pose here. Notice the knees, the bending of the knees, the Ardhamandali, Aramandi as they call it in Bharatanatyam. What you find in the eastern seaboard, seen in all the dances, all the dance positions and apsaras in Cambodia. And this is in Bante Shre. And just below Shiva, here, is the poet, the Tamil poet Kare Kalamaya. Very small. While Shiva is seen, and this is in Thailand, in Phnom Rung, Shiva is seen in a dancing position again on top. And right below him, and this is actually a replica, is the reclining Vishnu. But notice by this time, later on, the Ananta, the serpent, has become a Makara. It's a replacement because the original was stolen and now it's in the museum. You find strong similarities with temples in Kalinga and also Kanchipuram. A particular popular motif is Ravana shaking Mount Kailasa, which you find in Ellora and Kailasanath temple. You find it in Patadakal. You find it here. And generally, if you find it in a place, 100 years later, you'll find it in Cambodia. That includes even inscriptions in beautiful Sanskrit, exquisite meters, Vasanta Tilaka, and so on. You find wonderful meters, sometimes emulating Kalidasa and so on. And on the right-hand side, and this is close-up, Shiva and Parvati on Kailasa, and right below them is Ravana shaking Kailasa. Yeah. So Shiva is always on Mount Kailasa. Vishnu sleeps on the ocean of milk. And even if you don't have a temple mountain, the temples are carved behind Shiva. This is a Shiva from Prekan, which is actually a Buddhist monument. And it was built much later in the 13th century, actually built earlier but made big by Jayavarman VII, a Buddhist monument, and you find Shiva there. Artificial temple mountains like Namrung are huge structures. These were temples of piety, they were temples of power. They were issued to show that the local person there showed, yes, I'm faithful to my king there, but he was showing his local power there. And Namrung has the most exquisite, it's near Nakor Ratchasima, Rajasima, Nakor Nagara in Thailand. And other Shiva temples are also temple mountains. Coming closer to Angkor Wat in the 10th and 11th centuries, you find Bapun. Some of you may be familiar with the French system of restoration. They would take down individually all the rocks and the stones and the bricks, number them, and then put it all together. When that was done in Bapun, Pol Pot regimes came, they burnt all the plants. And so this was like a huge three-dimensional puzzle. Parts of it survived in Paris, the plants. And so when I visited early in 2002 and 2003, what you found was all these rocks and stones, and people's like, how are we going to put this together? And Pascal Royer, alas, he's no more, was the architect in charge of the whole restoration. He saw it to a completion. And he took me in the times when it was not, the public was not allowed, on that scaffolding on top. I kept thinking I should have done this 20 years ago. And to see the carvings on top. And eventually, since 2002, I've seen it come up. And now, by 2015, it was pretty much completed and it's restored to its original glory. It's quite impressive. A temple to Shiva, but with a lot of Krishna carvings and Rama carvings too on top. It's just a beautiful temple. I strongly. Other deities, Durga. Notice the buffalo below her feet. But if this is 7th century, it's earlier than the Devi Mahatmyam and some of the texts which really make it big. So it's possible that these people had recourse to sources to which the Devi Mahatmyam also appealed. So not that the text influenced this, but they both go back to the same sources. Lakshmi and Gajalakshmi, particularly on lintels, which you still see in many temples around the world, was very popular. This is in Banteshri, one of the most popular, one of the most beautiful temples. Brahma is also seen, Taprom, and the French left this temple in its original state to show the world how it looked like when they first came. The Indian government, I think, the ASI is in charge of this exactly. And Bayon, again a Buddhist monument, but originally people had thought that the heads was Brahma, but eventually they realized it was really a form of Buddha, but shaped after Jayavarman VII's face. Navagraha is also seen. Let's quickly go through some of the popular iconography of Vishnu. There's a particular monument called Vishnu White Monument. That's all they call it in Paris. And I've spent about 20 years trying to figure out what this meant. And on top of this monument, right on top, you find 4 different images of Vishnu. Vishnu Chaturbhuja with 4 arms, Vishnu on Garuda, 8 arms, and the reverse reclining Vishnu. And there is a method in my madness. I'll come back to these forms. That's why I wanted to bring them up here. Sorry. And if you count the Vishnus, there are 10-20 little Vishnus, 4-armed ones, around, yes, I counted. And on top are 4 real Vishnu, bigger ones. So 10-24 totally. Yes, exactly. But everyone tells me that, but the question is, so what, right? So why did they have it as an issue? But there won't be time to get deeply into it now, but I'd be very happy to share information with you on that. So the question is, where did this come from? Because there's no similar one in India. The closest you come to it is this kind of Varaha, which you find plenty of Varahas like this in Madhya Pradesh and during the Chandela period, lots of them. And you find a big one in Khajuraho also. So, and then you find the Sahasra Linga here, or the Koti Lingas, but none to Vishnu. So what do we have on top? Vishnu Chaturbhuja and the 8-armed Vishnu. And I'll very briefly touch upon one of them today, at least, or two of them, the 8-armed Vishnu and the reverse reclining Vishnu. Reverse because his head is on the right-hand side, not on the left as usual. And there's a reason for that too. So the Chaturbhuja is the most common one. Look at the chakra on the right hand. It's not flat. It's not looking at you. It's this way, vertical. Very typical of Pallava iconography. It's called the Prayoga chakra, seen in Tirukannapuram in South India, one of the Divya Deshams also. But notice on his right hand, left hand, the mace. It looks like a baseball bat. It looks nothing like a mace that we find here. And I thought that was a unique Cambodian invention, but it didn't seem to be that way. And on the right hand, he holds a ball, which has been a mystery. Walter Spink thought it was butter. And then other people have thought it was the earth, but then some people said no one knew the earth was round then. But people now say it could be a lotus bud. But the baseball bat, the closest I've come to is this one, which I've seen in Vidisha Museum. And you see it from the 7th century onwards. So there's obviously, they come from a certain school of iconography. You find the Chaturbhuja Vishnus in traffic circles. You go up Pradakshina around them, but that's no matter. And Garudasana, also very popular. One of the earliest all these are the early representations of Vishnu, even in pre-Angkorian times, and shared in Vietnam also. This Garudasana is actually from Vietnam. Exquisitely beautiful. Also seen in Prasad Kravan, a name which I'll keep coming back to. And Garuda, Vishnu on Garuda was popular in a place called Prasad Kokpo, which has beautiful inscriptions speaking about a whole lineage of people who took care of it. Prasad Kokpo is north of Siem Reap, and having read about it, because it identifies the temple with Shweta Dvipa from the Narayana section of the Mahabharata, I was so fascinated and I wanted to see it too. But the sculpture is just extraordinarily beautiful. And then Vishnu with 8 arms. Where do you find Vishnu with 8 arms? Very early in Cambodia, you find Vishnu with 8 arms. This Vishnu was found near this particular shrine, south of Phnom Penh, in an area called Phnom Da, near Phnom Da. And nearby, they found an inscription speaking about a Vishnu called Hari Kambujendra. So we don't know if this particular 8-armed Vishnu was Hari Kambujendra, but he's known by that name. He's in the Phnom Penh Museum now. You have to go from Phnom Penh about 80 kilometers, then you go in the canal for about 30 kilometers, and you climb the hill. It's like a folk tale. When and then you find this parrot which tells you the story, right? So you go on top of the hill and you find that particular Hari Kambujendra was found there. And when I went to make my pilgrimage to the museum, it was really a pilgrimage for me. He was undergoing plastic surgery. So, but it's possible, though, that the weapons that he has are quite unique. They go back to the kind of things that you find in Manu. So in the Manu Dharma Shastra. India, where do you find them? 8-armed Vishnu, Badami caves. And here in Cambodia, you find in Prasad Kravan, in the central tower, you find an 8-armed Vishnu. And on the right most shrine, you find a Devi temple. Prasad Kravan, you have to go off the map and you'll find it. And this is the eight-armed Vishnu. And on spring equinox, the rising sun will fall on where the main Murti would have been, right there. So that's my shadow there on that. And the last temple is the Devi temple, where you find Devi with Shankachakra. Eight-armed Vishnu was Tariq was probably the main icon in Angkor Wat. Also, today he looks like a Buddha because the hands have been taken off and new arms have been put with Buddha attributes, and the head has been lopped off and the new head has come back. But this is probably the main deity on the top shrine, the top floor of Angkor Wat. He's very popular. Eight-armed Vishnus are very popular in the imagination of Cambodians even now, and you'll find them in many traffic circles. It's, I stop causing traffic accidents almost to take pictures of them. And the one in Badami is the most exquisite one. The one which I want to come back to later is the one in Kanchipuram. There's a whole temple addressed to the eight-armed Vishnu. And it is said that that's where Gajendra Moksha took place. And the earlier history goes back to 3 Kushana images. 2 are from Mathura. But notice, you don't have to read every one of this. It's just to tell you that the attributes in all the arms are different in every eight-armed Vishnu. Depending on the purpose for which the Pratishtha has taken place, it could be very different. So there is no uniformity. So it could be a rock, we are not able to find them. But at one point I'd like to mention about this particular eight-armed Vishnu. Hardly seen by visitors, on top of his head, you find a crocodile, like a porpoise-like figure. And I must say, for 15 years, I agitated about why they had that crocodile there, same as the Vishnuite monument. And then it all came together. All that you need is a right text sometimes at the right point. And, you can talk about eight-armed Vishnu. Where do you find it? Okay. The eight-armed Vishnu in Kanchipuram came to Gajendra's rescue. So there's a crocodile connected. But why should it be on top of his head? Right? That's not the point at all. So it didn't make sense. And the other eight-armed Vishnu in Bhagavata Purana is in Vaikunta, where Krishna and he go there to search for a baby, and they find an eight-armed Vishnu sitting. That didn't make sense either. And then finally, I came to this, all these are the different reasons. This particular passage from the Vishnu Purana, and the word is Shushumara. The form of the mighty Hari, which is present in heaven, consisting of the constellation, is the porpoise. That is the same word as a crocodile, the Gangetic dolphin, actually. And it's said to be the constellation which is upheld by Hari. And until you find that passage from the Vishnu Purana, it's like, oh my God. And when I must have been floating in air for about a week after that. But this is the one which speaks about the constellation around Dhruva. And it's almost like it's mapped out on top. Reverse reclining Vishnu, I'm sorry I can't spend more time on that. There's lots to get into. Reverse reclining Vishnu with the head on one side. Reclining Vishnus are popular, very popular period. Earlier ones, Vietnam, but notice he's holding Brahma. So you find similarities and differences. He's holding the Brahma. This is a regular Vishnu with the head on the left. And the feet usually is on the south because we are assuming an east-facing Vishnu. And in Phnom Kulen, I showed you many of these already. You have to be very careful because you're stepping on them. It's on the water because they've always had these on waterbeds to show that the reclining Vishnu is Seshasai is on Vishnu, is in the water. And in the western Barai, built in the 10th and 11th centuries, one of the largest man-made, human-made reservoirs. You have the eastern Barai and the western Barai. Right in the middle is an island, and in the western Mabon, they found eventually, in 1930s, the French found a bronze reclining Vishnu. I took these pictures from a plane. When you sit on the right-hand side of a plane taking off, you can get these. And these pictures are from the French studies. And this bronze one has been restored. It's now in the museum in Phnom Penh. And the idea is, of course, in the Western Barai, when he was there, there's been recreation, virtual recreation of the temple by a scholar in Australia called Marnie Fenley. And she has a virtual recreation. When you put the 3D glasses on, you feel you're walking into the temple, you see him there. It's just an amazing experience. I mean, I was like, and it looks like he's floating on water. And you can imagine that they may have had a similar Vishnu in mind when they did it. And Kalinga is a place where they sailed to Southeast Asia all the time. I'm not saying they knew this Vishnu, but it's possible they had very similar idea. This Vishnu was found, by the way, only in the 1960s. He had been covered by different vegetation. And there's another one also nearby. And this one is in Dane Canal district. But when the Brahmani river is in flood, he looks like he's floating on it, which is quite amazing. The restoration is not great, but you can see the size with that old ambassador car there. So, I mean, but what is a reverse reclining Vishnu? You find very few of these. Remember Dashavatara temple, and that a south-facing reclining Vishnu has his head like this. And you find similar ones like this, and it took me forever to figure out with a compass in hand that if the head is on this side, like you find it, this Vishnu is invariably facing west or south. Exception, Sri Rangam. And so the Anantashayan directions, if he's facing south, the feet always have to be on the south or a different way. So if he's facing east, the head is on the left and the feet is to the south. And that's how you find in Mahabalipuram, on the left. On the right, however, is a reverse reclining Vishnu on top of a temple called Tiruveheka, maybe 4th, maybe 5th century, in Kanchipuram. So I keep coming back to Kanchipuram. And if he's facing west or south, that's how his head will be oriented. And in Cambodia, they followed that very specifically. If you enter Angkor Wat, on the lintels, you find a Vishnu like this, right on the entrance to Angkor Wat on top. But notice that in time, that has become a makara. It could have been either just a substitution of a makara for Ananta, or I suspect it was more of the Chinese influence. Very strongly seen here. This is in Prekan. Other manifestations of Vishnu racing through here to get to Angkor. Hayagriva. This is where I feel there's a strong Pancharatra influence. There is a very strong Pancharatra connection. Kamaleshwar Bhattacharya has published since the 1955 onwards about the Pancharatra, and there are inscriptions which speak about Pancharatra texts. So we have clearly a Hayagriva. The only thing I really feel happy about is they just call him horse-headed deity in Musigime, and after I pestered them for 12 years, they finally changed the name to Hayagriva. And I'm thrilled with that. So in Kampong Tom province, in that 8-sided shrine in Sambao Prekok, which is one of the earliest capitals of Funan, they found that particular Hayagriva. 8-sided. Again, like 5 associated with Shiva, 8 always with Vishnu, Ashtakshara and so on. That's not the only Hayagriva. There are very tall Hayagrivas here. And Thierry Zephyr, who's a professor at the Louvre, was telling me how the head for the right, one on the right was in a Godrej, in the steel bureau. And the body was somewhere else, and it took him, after several years, he put them together. Here, there are different Hayagrivas. And in this small carving from Bante Shre, he's actually putting down the demons. Very Vaishnavite in scope. So, the temple in Bante Shre is actually a Shiva temple. It was built in the 10th century by nobility, and it was built by a person called Yajnavaraha, who calls himself later on as a Sambandhi, as connected with the Prasad Koko people. Yajnavaraha's brother, Vishnu Kumara, and people forget it, the sister, Jahnavi, is also involved in that. And she was also responsible in building that temple. What are the avatars known? Lot about Rama. And in Bante Shre, you find Narasimha. Trivikrama is seen in many places, but notice something very significant all over the Khmer Empire and Cambodia. The right leg is very gently raised. It is not like how we find in the Indian versions, where they have 2 or 3 positions. One is vertically, just at right angles. But no, in Prasad Kravan, very gently. And here, it's above your waist in Kanchipuram, in the Vaikunta Perumal temple. But there, again, very gentle. You find many scenes from the Ramayana. This is from Bapun, a Shiva temple. Hanuman, Sita giving the ring. Vali Sugriva, Bapun. Vali Sugriva touched a nerve. Why? You know, these brothers were always fighting and killing each other for the kingdom. So it seems to have touched the raw nerve there. And Vali and Sugriva, this is more than human size. And you find it in Bante Shre, Rama, Angkor Wat Ramayana scenes, Balarama, and Krishna. One of the earliest icons is Krishna Govardhana, and tomorrow I'll be dealing in great detail with the Krishna Govardhana, how it changes, the position changes from stiffly held legs, which shows effort and shrama in holding up Govardhana, to, as you go on over the centuries, to a very playful Leela, this kind of position of what you find in Krishna playing the flute, and then holding up Govardhana to a playful, at ease kind of thing. The panels in Bapun also have Krishnavatara. This is Devaki and Vasudeva grieving as the child is taken off to be tossed. Killing of the children. I'm just showing you a few to give you a flavor. The only Kalinga Nartanam I've seen in all of Cambodia. There may be more, but hard to find. And I suspect that is because they valorized the Naga so much that they couldn't quite identify with the story of a Naga being subdued here. But the Govardhana scene is very common, over and over again. Finally, Angkor. Built, and at any time of the year, it's gorgeous. Angkor Wat is near Siem Reap. Angkor is a local pronunciation of Nagara. Wat from Vatika. Built around 1132, 1135, Suryavarman II. People who've gone to Angkor will recognize the spot where you find the reflections. Look at the 5 spires. The traditional Panchayatna temples, quincocks, 5 towers, similar to those in Ocean in Rajasthan, and here the Brahmeshwar temple. So what we have here is people intellectually shopping for the perfect temple. Bits of Kalinga and bits of Kanchipuram. Today it's a Buddhist temple, but when it was built addressed to Vishnu, Aditya. And it was built by Aditya Suryavarman, sun, big time sun. And the sunrises there are spectacular, as you can see. Suryavarman is seen on the southern panel, on the southern part of Angkor Wat, which shows that this may have been done after he died. He is called Paramavishnu Loka in the local inscriptions there. That is, he who went to the highest abode of Vishnu. Angkor Wat faces west, and therefore the early French scholars thought it was a funerary monument. I strongly disagree with that, because many Vishnu temples in the Kanchipuram area, at least about 11 in that area and more like 19 among the Divya Deshas, face west. So that's nothing uncommon in India. And a 14th century diplomat said, the towers are built of gold. The gold is long gone, but at sunset, it still seems that way. Still looks that way. But yes, it has a lot to do with the sun. Vishnu, among the Adityas, he is the highest, built by Suryavarman. And this Surya, in fact, I almost subtitled my lecture, Art, Architecture, and Archeoastronomy. But I'm not spending a whole lot of time on the last part, which is why I left it out. And this part is not my research. It's done by someone else, and I have just documented it to show my students. So this has been published by someone else way back in 1976. The sun, before the spring equinox and the autumn equinox, keeps coming closer and closer. And on the equinox day, it rises right behind the central tower. If you stand in and that was predicted by 3 graduate students who had never been to Angkor from the University of Michigan, one from the history of science, one from astronomy, and one an art historian as graduate students. The French had released the measurements in metric units in 1975. Using those, they played around with it to see what would have been the basic measurement for Angkor Wat. This morning, Professor Jha was telling me about, we were seeing Brihadishwara temple and how the unit of measurement is the middle finger. In many Hindu temples, the measurement was the hath, from the shoulder to even now in South India, when they measure flowers, it's this way. So using all these metric units, the 3 students tried to figure out what would have been the basic unit of measurement of Angkor Wat, and what the latitude and the longitude of its placement would have been. They kind of had a hunch about it, because this has been done before in other civilizations, other cultures. Mesoamerica has many examples. We find it in Egypt, and we find many in India too. And so when they looked at it, they knew how the sun would rise right behind this. There were many measurements that they took, and they utilized to show how the planets are aligned, and I won't get into it. Now you can read it on your own. But also, I must say, when I started to go to Angkor Wat, it was pretty empty. Sometimes I had the temple to myself, as you could say. I mean, you really, literally this. So, and those were the shop people setting up there. So you literally had no one there. But the reason I'm showing you this is not the development of tourism, but these are the moats and the causeways. And the measurements for every one of these were brought into Suryavarman's hath measurements, and they had the numbers. They had no idea what it meant, but eventually they figured out that all these measurements, which they had in Suryavarman's hand measurements, came down to different units of the calendar according to the Puranas. Kali Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, and Krita Yuga. And this was published early on in 1976, and if anyone's interested, I'd be happy to send you the article, in Astronomy and Cosmology at Angkor Wat, which came in Science, peer-reviewed. And every detail, I mean, there are hundreds of little details. For instance, the number of devas, the number of asuras, would be the number of days between the equinox and the solstice, and so on. So having read this, I was did my amateur experimentation, which may or may not be right. I mean, there may be other explanations. But on spring equinox day, as I was taking the picture of the sun rising behind the tower, I ran to the eastern side, which is where you find the churning of the ocean of milk. And the rising sun fell right on Kurma, which was kind of pretty cool. Now, again, the two sides are just the pillars. It may happen several times a year. But that happening that day was pretty nice. And it seems to happen more often than I would think for it to be just coincidence. So there seems to be some kind of method in placing these. So another year, this was March. Another year I was there in December. So I wasn't there exactly on winter solstice, but close enough, about 2 days before that. And I wanted to see what happened with, this is Bhishma. And you remember the Mahabharata panel? Yeah, as you go in to the right? And Bhishma on the bed of arrows, on the red, and next the blue arrow shows the Panchapandavas, right? And so this is taken in like April or May. But just before the winter solstice, and you remember what happens with the Uttarayana Punyakala begins, the sunlight, the setting sun comes very close to his bed of arrows. And you realize that that's the beginning of the day when he gives up his life. So again, this could happen many times a year. And these are just panels of light. But other times of the year, it's moved onwards. So it seems to be, at least for that day, one of the coincidences that happens. So now, this is obviously very true of, since I'm running out of time, I'll be very fast here. This is actually seen in many parts, many temples in this country too. One of the earliest ones, apparently, has been near Vidisha, near Bhopal. And I didn't know this, but after reading a particular article, I realized that Vidisha, apparently, the Tropic of Cancer went through the Udayagiri caves at that time. And because of the precession of equinoxes, it has shifted over the centuries. And so Udayagiri, where the earliest churning panel, that is early Gupta, 401, 402, the earliest churning panel is found there, defaced now, but just beautiful. So I've been hunting all the churning panels. That's the focus of my research. It was right on the Tropic of Cancer. And according to one article, the rising sun on summer solstice falls on the Anantashayana Vishnu and the bas-relief of Varaha on summer solstice day. Again, not my research. And this is that by Balasubramaniam, Professor Balasubramaniam, who's no more. He was in IIT Kanpur. I've never had the pleasure of meeting him, but I discussed it many times on the phone with him. And he argues in that particular article that the iron pillar, which you find here near Qutub Minar, that iron pillar, he argues, was originally in front of this Varaha shrine, actually. And it's a very big article. Anyway, going back to all these, what does this mean is the question. Prekhan. All the different churnings. And over the years, and through reading and through seeing the context of where these churning panels have met, I've come over a number of reasons as to what the meaning could have been over the centuries. As you all know, there's no one single meaning to any Hindu story. The more the meanings, the layers of meanings, the better. The legitimation of kingship is the strongest because it's in that particular churning scene, particularly in Angkor Wat, that the central anthropomorphic figure of Vishnu has the Indra Abhisheka happening, with the Abhisheka taking place, the actual anointing. And even now, when you go to rituals of the major Abhisheka of the Vishnu icons, through a big colander with holes in it, that's where the water is poured, and the Purusha Sukta, the creation hymn, is recited. Even now, when the Abhisheka takes place, that's the anointing. And that kind of Abhisheka takes place for Lakshmi also in the Vishnu Purana, when she emerges from the ocean of milk. The story also highlights the importance of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, depending on the Purana you read. And I could go into great detail about each one of them, and that's the focus of my book. There are many didactic meanings. The very uneasy friendship between the Devas and Asuras, very similar to the very uneasy friendship between the charms, and they talk about it. They openly talk about the charms as Asuras. There are calendar functions, and we noted some of them already. Churning for Soma, this is a big version of that. In the Natya Shastra, the very first story that's ever performed is this particular story. And it's said to be one which has all the 4 Purusharthas included in it. It has the origin stories and the significance of Vasuki as a Naga, as an ancestor for the Khmer people. Some scholars, French scholars like Paul Mew, have said that it guards the nidhis which rise from the Bayon area. Allegorical meanings, the rising of the Siddhis in Kashmir Shaivism. And finally, the significance of sea maritime exercises. The last verse of the Tirupavai of Andal in the 9th century says, Vanga kadal kadainda Madhavanai Keshavanai. Madhava Keshava, who churned the Vanga kadal, the ocean. Well, it's the Bay of Bengal, Vanga, but Vanga also means ship. So the ship-laden ocean. Yeah, or Bay of Bengal, Vanga. And of course, the context of the story in the Ramayana. If you go back to, you have to do the kind of a textual contextualization and the sculptural contextualization. Where does it occur? In which temple? Is it a Shiva temple or a Vishnu temple? And in what context does the story appear there? And so, in the Ramayana, the primordial question, how can we be immortal, free of old age and disease? Something that everyone, the quest for the Chiranjeevi, to be a Chiranjeevi, right? And that's why it's still seen in the Memorial Park in 2003 to remember those who fell in the war and in the churning of the ocean of milk. But at the end of the churning of the ocean of milk, you see a big monkey. And all the local guys will tell you, it's Hanuman. And some people tell you, no, it's a royal thing, it's Sugriva. Again, something which had me puzzled for about 10 or 15 years. And again, the aha moment when you read the right text. And then suddenly all the texts come into place. It's like you search for one and you find 15 of them. All that you have to do is to go to Kambant Ramayana. And there, it said, standing with the devas and the demons when the whirling Mandara's form was worn out, Vali, the strong one with strong shoulders, churned the swirling sea. Vali, the one who's older than Sugriva, is the victorian one. He tied the strong Ravana tight to his tail. And then he leaped in the 8 directions. And when the devas besieged Vali, he with the strong arms used as a churning rod the mountain. Not once, but he keeps repeating the story that Vali was there, the churning of the ocean of milk. And then here he says, the towering mountain Mandara was a churning rod. Vasuki, who had no end, was a churning rope. The anchor stone was Vishnu, and so on. And in this beautiful verse, Tara comes out to tell Vali, why do you want to go and accept Sugriva's challenge to the battle? You were ready to slaughter him yesterday and he went away defeated. He's coming back and challenging you. There's something strange afoot. She's warning him. She says, don't go. And he doesn't listen, and he looks at her and he says, we have to start with the end. Mayile el kuyelori mori marakalavado. Oh, my wife, beautiful as a peacock with words as sweet as a koel bird. Did you forget? Mayile el kuyelori, beautiful words. Marakalavado, did you forget? I said, you're just a woman. And he says, did you forget when the Devas pulled the mountain and they turned it around? They had no energy. I stepped in and I saved the day. Okay, so you have all the Kamban. But it's contemporary, same time as Angkor Wat. Almost. But that's not the only thing. Let's go here. When you see this particular one, I took over and I churned it like a pitcher of yogurt, right? That's what he says. Exactly seen in this Patadakal depiction. Look at the top. Down below, you have a regular churning of ocean of milk. On top of that, in the Virupaksha temple, it's just, then it all kind of comes into place. I'm just going to summarize it. In the Ranganatha Ramayana, Andhra, the story is that Vali and Sugriva were both at the churning, and Tara was given to them. And then, in Malayalam songs, the Theyyam songs, Vali is placed at the churning. So Vali is alluded to, and Rich Freeman has said that earliest documentation comes in the original texts and so on. So it seems to be seen in all the southern states, but it's been forgotten. Everyone's forgotten about it now, but it's still there. Last point before I conclude, and again touching upon this, the Kanchipuram network. It is a strong suggestion on my part that there was close connection between the Pallavas. We already saw it in the script. But in the placement of the temples in the iconography. And the three temples I'm going to talk about here, or mention, not talk about, are all in the 108 Divyadeshas, which have been sung about by the Arvars. Vaikunta Perumal Temple. This is the only other temple in the world addressed to Vishnu, which is 3 floors and west-facing like Angkor Wat. No other temple. There are other 3 or 4 floor temples, but they are all east-facing. This is the only one, Vaikunta Perumal Temple, built in 770, Parameshwara Vinnagaram. Vinnagaram is the Tamil version of Vishnu Graha. Again, look at the names, Parama Vishnu Loka, the posthumous name of Suryavarman. And here, Parameshwara Vinnagaram. The temple for the 8-armed Vishnu, remember we spoke about that, so I'm just tying it all up together. And the reverse reclining Vishnu. So since you've already spoken about all of these, the reverse reclining Vishnu, the 8-armed Vishnu, and the churning 3/4 temple, the Vaikunta Perumal Temple. This is the east-facing one. Another east-facing one. This is where Ramanuja gave the Tirumantra to the population. It was taken early in January December one year. And this is in Madurai. But this is a later temple. But Kanchipuram is early, 8th century, 770, west-facing. And the iconographic program around it is very similar too. As you go around, you find a story of Nandivarman. And visual punning. It could be Vishnu, it could be the king. And in that temple, you find the churning of the ocean of milk panel, a reverse reclining Vishnu, Ravana shaking Mount Kailasa, 8-armed Vishnu, bingo, it all comes together. So you have all of these together here. I conclude with this point here by raising a question. Who owns this art? We've been looking at the magnificence of Angkor, and we are well aware of many of our own monuments which are being spoiled and really ruined by hordes of tourists. But who owns this? How can we preserve the heritage? I'm using very personal examples here. This was a panel which drew me into a study of Angkor for many, many years. And over several years, I've been going year after year after year. It's like a temple to go to this museum and see this Vishnu on Garuda. Having read the inscriptions of Prasad Kokpo, I desperately wanted to visit that place, the Shvetadvipa. It took a while. In 2002, they demined that area. It was way north of Siem Reap. But once it took like 3 hours to cover 2 kilometers. But once you go there, this is all remains. So had that carving been here, it wouldn't be here today. On the other hand, you also saw Cabalspian. This was taken in the December when the water was rushing. But during the summer, it's pretty dry. I took this in summer of 2002. And notice the Vishnu, reclining Vishnu, in 2002. I went 1 year later and this is why when they told me to go to the churning today, you go. And it's like, oh my God. They've restored it now, but it's gone. And it's because we, as first world nations, want to own that art. Harihara, no head. In the wall, you find a sign which tells you where you can find the head. But when you go to see the head, which is in the Gime, there's no sign to tell you where the body is. But in India, we begin and end lectures on an auspicious note. So I'd like to end this on an auspicious note by telling you that indeed this story has a happy ending. And the head was restored to the body a couple of years back, and there were dances that took place. As I was coming down Cabalspian, I saw a tree hit by lightning. It seemed to be dead. On the other hand, you had, just next to it was this very lush banana plantation. And it seemed to me almost to be a metaphor of where the Hindu tradition is thriving as a living religion. And Angkor is beautiful, but the Hindu tradition is a museum piece here and gone. But it's well and thriving, thank you, in Atlanta. Thank you.
So it was a wonderful lecture and very enlightening. I wanted to ask the significance behind 1024 Vishnus. Did you find something about that?
There are 2 or 3 meanings, and I'll just give you one of them right now. I argue actually in the paper that this monument is a structure which is called the Vishaka Yupa, which you find in Pancharatra text, Satvata Samhita, and also in the Lakshmi Tantra.
Okay.
And it's found in heaven, and it has 4 sides for the 4 manifestations of Vishnu. But the word Vishaka also means forking. And in the text, and what you find here is that each manifestation, Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Niruddha, fork into 4 each, and they correlate them with 4 states of the sleeping, dreaming, and so on. And each that, again, it forks into 4. So the word Vishaka itself is a clue of forking. And ultimately, you go into 64, and then it branches out.
Okay.
So I'm not saying that's the conclusive meaning. It's the closest I could come to in one sense. Another possible meaning, I would think, is as we all know, Sahasra is the sign for the infinity. And this particular monument is reflective of the infinity of Vishnu. And therefore, when we say Sahasra Shirsha Purushaha, We mean not literally he has 1,000 heads, but it's a unity, because otherwise we wouldn't say Sahasraksha Sahasrapath.
Right.
It's not a literal. So the closest you come to 1,000, if you take this as a calendrical unit of 60 years cycles, you would find because there are other similar structures in Cambodia with 960. Sorry? Oh, sorry. So it's 960 or 1020. So it's the two 60-year cycles round which box in the 1,000. So if we want to talk about time units, that seems to be a possibility also. So I mentioned both of these as possibilities in thinking through this, but there's no smoking gun.
Right. And one more question there was, why they considered only the churning of ocean very importantly? Because there are so many incidents are in our Puranas, but only churning of ocean is everywhere. Why?
This is the question I've been asking, and I told you there are multiple meanings. The one which I didn't get into also here is, apart from all the meanings I gave you, there's also one from landscape architecture. And that is, I told you that when I showed the map of the Mekong River, I said it flows upwards. But when it flows upwards, a professor friend of mine who's a landscape architect, Terry Shandelbach, he thinks that when it gets into Tonle Sap, there's a churning motion involved in the lake with the pushing up of it, that it seems to be almost like a physical visualization of it that seemed to bring it closer to home. I personally think it has a lot to do with the legitimation of kingship. Over and over again with the Rajya Lakshmi, because it's when you have that, as you see, not just in Hindu but in Jain, in the Adi Purana also, in Kannada. It's that which makes the anointing of the Jina, and that anointing part of it. And I think that's a very important part for them, because even though they don't show they never show the later part of the story, nothing about Mohini Avatara, but the early part. So I think all the meanings that I showed at some point had significance to them. So it's not like an either or, it's and, which is I think a symbol of Hindu culture is the and. It's not the either or, the conjunction is always and.
It has been really an engaging lecture, and we did not realize how the time flies. And although she said that she has overstepped time, but we did not realize. It could have gone, I don't know whether our division has made some arrangement for dinner also, but they should we could have gone on and on. That's there. And I had been to Cambodia, and Dr. Jha and Dr. Bachchan Kumar, we three of us went to Cambodia, and now I think of revisiting Cambodia after seeing all this, because there are many things which didn't occur to our mind.
Oh, I'll come with you.
Yeah, sure. And especially the sunrise. In fact, I remember that three of us got up early in the morning at around 3:30 or 4. The vehicle took us to the place, and there were thousands and thousands already standing there to see the sunrise. And we remained waiting for the sunrise, and I think at around 6:30 someone said that now sun won't come, it has gone in the clouds. So 2.5 hours of patient tapasya, we should say, we couldn't see the sun. And then they said that only fortunate people can see the sunrise. So she is really fortunate to see the sun. So that was there. And another thing which we realized is that there was a need to really look into the iconography which the temples depict, because in the modern times most of the tour guides and the people who are dealing with the archaeology recently even do not know about the nuances of the iconography which has been depicted in the temple of Angkor and the entire Siam Reap, in fact in the entire area. And because of the various reasons related to religion and related to political crisis, I think they are not in a position to give you the real picture. And that is why IGNCA made an initiative to the Apsara National Authority, extending its support for bringing out a multimedia presentation for the Angkor Wat temple. And we signed an MOU with them, because we had done some work in Brihadeshwara temple, which is relatively a small temple, but the work has been large and very mammoth and very extensive. So we thought that we would also take it up as a challenge, and our team, which is a very which comprises of eminent experts related to cultural informatics. So we took up this project, and I am happy that under the guidance of Professor Jha, our team is doing a fantastic work, and soon we would be in a position to present some kind of a document which tells that there is lot to know, lot to learn, and lot to tell related to the iconography of entire Angkor Wat. I would also like to submit that this is an area which has been grossly neglected by our academics, especially when I spoke to the teachers of history during my interaction in refresher courses, and as many as 250 of them, I just asked how many of you really know about iconography and paleography and subjects like this. Only 3-4 hands could be seen in the entire audience, because we have been only focusing on the mainstream and the popular subjects which are easily available for study. But these are all difficult subjects. One has to put his life, one has to put his entire brilliance and intellect to decipher those depictions, those images, and its interpretation. As she very rightly said, that particularly in Hindu tradition there is no or. It is all inclusive. There can be multiple interpretations. Jaki rahi bhavna jaisi, Prabhu murati dekhi tinatesi. So it is the crux of the whole thing. We see God in many ways, and I mean, there was it was a misconception that people used to laugh at Indian mythology when they used to say 33 koti. So koti was types. And people laughed, you have 33 crores of the deities, which is not wrong. I mean, we are all fooling ourselves by criticizing our own traditions. We should not criticize our own tradition. We should go into the deeper sense and find out what is all there and what those people have thought of maybe 1,000 years back, which is more important. And thanks to Professor Vasudha Narayanan, she has dealt this subject in great details, and thanks to her that she has brought so many things to our knowledge about which we were not very aware of. I belong to Madhya Pradesh. I belong to Bhopal. From there, Vidisha is only 45 kilometers. Unfortunately, today I do not have the picture. I would have shown you the line of Cancer. I was standing at that point where the line crosses the main road, and I have seen the Udaigiri caves. First churning panel in Udaigiri. Since my early childhood, I have been visiting that place. It is quite nearer to Sanchi. So many of you who are also interested in Buddhist monument and Herodotus. It's an amazing place. Vidisha, you can go and see. It's amazing place. But combining these two things never occurred to even my mind. I mean, like this is only a genius like Professor Vasudha Narayanan can think. My gratitude to her that she accepted our invitation to come deliver lectures to our students. I am sure that our students and the faculty members would be benefited by her lectures, and she would keep us guiding. I must also tell you that we have been experimenting with doing a few workshops on iconography and paleography. We have been requesting Professor Nagaswamy to guide us, and he has been kind enough to do these workshops, and they have been very successful. But looking at his age, he is almost 89 now, and he says that I am ready to spend as much time as possible in Chennai. So even last year we did a workshop in Chennai for the students, and we had a tremendous response. So students who are young, even who are not all that young, I feel myself young when I see all these things. Iconography is a subject where we need to focus a lot, because unless we do that, we will not be in a position to understand our heritage, our temples, our monuments. So this has been really enlightening lecture, and I would thank her for gracing this occasion and benefiting all the audience. Thank you very much.